힙합의 발원지 브롱스입니다.
좀 거리들이 좀 빡세 보이네요.
아, 괜찮아요. 우리 가는 데는 괜찮아요. 브롱스 하이스쿨 오브 사이언스 과학고거든요. 뉴욕에 유명한 특목고가 3개가 있어요. 브루클린 텍, 브롱스 사이언스, 스타이베센트. 뉴욕에 있는 특목고들이 진짜 대단한 학교들이 많은데 브롱스 하이스쿨 오브 사이언스에서 노벨상 수상자를 8명 배출했어요. 고등학교 하나가. 근데 여기를 졸업하신 유명한 한국계 인재가 있어서 그분과 같이 뉴요커 인터뷰 이런 걸 좀 하려고 왔습니다.
Hello!
Hi!
So nice to see you.
Thank
Welcome.
you so much.
Welcome to my school.
소설 파친코의 작가님으로 세계적으로 널리 알려지신 이민진 작가님.
안녕하세요.
여기 동문생들 자랑 좀 하고 가신다고?
So my high school has the most Nobel Prize laureates out of any high school in the world, which I think is kind of cool. And I think they're mostly in physics.
Wow.
Physics, and one chemistry. The weirdo. Yeah.
여기 고등학교를 빛낸 월이거든요. 여기에 작가님 이름이 있어가지고 잠깐 보러 왔어요. 86년 졸업. I'm actually in Bronx right now.
Welcome to the Bronx.
Well, thank you.
And welcome to my high school.
You know, Bronx, as you well know, has a reputation not only in the US but worldwide. Bronx is known as the birthplace of hip hop. And because so many early hip hop talk about drug abuse or poverty, so people have an image of Bronx as being a really tough neighborhood.
We're just keeping it real.
Okay. And we also have image of Bronx as being a predominantly African American or Caribbean American borough. So it's difficult for somebody in Korea to imagine a bookish Asian American girl going to school in Bronx. So what is it really like going to school here?
New York City has a really diverse population. In Korea especially, people think of New York as being either very poor or very rich.
Right.
But the reality is for most New Yorkers is that there's a huge middle class, and of the middle class is almost all immigrants. And Bronx Science is, I think, among the best in terms of getting a representation of immigration and socioeconomic class. And this is a school in which I felt really normal. And I say that because when I went to elementary school in Queens and also middle school in Queens, I didn't feel quite accepted or normal. But here, it's okay to be a nerd, and I'm very much a nerd.
So you just described New York as a city made up of many immigrant communities.
Yeah.
And you write novels about diasporas. And there are certain world-famous diasporas in New York City, like Little Italy and Chinatown in Lower Manhattan, but those are sort of fossilized now. That was 100 years ago. So as a New Yorker, what's the most interesting and dynamic immigrant community in New York right now?
Easily Queens, because Queens has more languages spoken than anywhere else in the whole world. And it brings forth a kind of dynamic, vital, and interesting population. I love New York because there are so many different kinds of people.
And I wanted to lead in with this conversation because I read your book, Pachinko Again, recently.
Oh, thank you.
I was going through the way you describe Ikaino, which for people who don't know is an immigrant community near Osaka where people of Korean descent still live. And I found your description of Ikaino reminded me a lot of Lower East Side Manhattan. So I'm like, wow, this is a lot like the tenement where the Irish Americans or Italian Americans or Chinese Americans got their start and where they were trying to be American or New Yorkers. So do you think you, being a New Yorker, informed in some ways the way you looked at this community?
Oh, what a wonderful, smart question. So one thing I should say is that in the novel, I call it Ikaino because it was called Ikaino for a certain period of its history. Now it's called Ikuno. So if you go to Japan today, you would go to Ikuno. I think being a New Yorker gave me a sense of anger about the world because I knew that people could be kind and fair to people who are different. And I think when I read about the history of Koreans in Japan, I was so upset because I couldn't believe that people could hate Koreans so much just because you're ethnically Korean. But then when I went to live in Japan, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be because I had so many people in Japan who were so nice to me. So once again, like you have all these ideas and then you go somewhere, you have to visit, you have to talk to people,
Right.
you have to become friends, you have to have food with them, and then you have to go to their houses. And all of a sudden, your preconceptions are so stupid. The Koreans in Japan, even today, experience discrimination. But I'm a Korean from America who speaks English, who has a Western education, and I have privilege. So I'm treated differently than somebody who's Korean Japanese who could be poor. And I always want to talk about the individual context of your experience because socioeconomic differences are uniform. They all signify a kind of code. And that happens to people in Japan very much.
But America also had its share of racism and anti-immigration sentiment. I remember seeing in history books pictures of saloon doors where they literally put up plaques like no Irish or dogs allowed. History of anti-immigrant populism in the US date back to at least 1820s and 1830s where there were know-nothing parties. What's the difference between that and the experience of Korean people in Japan?
It's absolutely true what you said. There are very important events in American history. Some of the greatest lynchings happened to Chinese Americans in this country. There's federal legislation excluding the Chinese. That's very important to mention, as well as the internment of the Japanese, where they were put in concentration camps and their property was taken from them. So racism against Asians has happened, happens still. Does that mean that it's better or worse than in Japan? I actually think in many ways it's significantly better in America. What's more possible in America is greater success. So I don't think there's a paradise in which there's no racism anywhere. That doesn't exist. That's our responsibility to make things happen.
I thought maybe the main difference is the principles on which the two different countries were founded. America, even if it has its imperfections, at least said that all men are created equal. So when an Asian American person goes to the US and when they're treated unfairly, you can accuse the American society and say, hey, you promised that I was going to be treated equally and you didn't keep your promise. Whereas in Japan, nobody ever said that you will be treated as the same as the Japanese person if you come here. So it's much harder to maybe make that claim.
I do want to say that the Korean Japanese people have done a lot of protesting and demonstrating against governments when things were unfair. So if you look at the legislation about fingerprinting, for example, where Korean Japanese were made to be fingerprinted and also made to feel alone and different. The Korean Japanese protested regularly and they won. So one of the things that people don't know is that if you have any civil rights advancement in Japan, very often they came from the Koreans because they complained. And they protested, and they boycotted. And I'm very proud of that. I think it's wonderful. Because the Koreans in Japan complained, everybody else who was a foreigner got the benefits.
Wow.
Which is really nice. And I think we should give them credit. And also, I think that in Korea, even then, if you think about how young the democracy is in South Korea, and how things are changing, it's changing because I think Koreans have really tried to make things better. And I think it's not perfect, but there is progress being made.
You know, I'm sure you get a lot of questions like, do you feel more American or do you feel more Korean when you speak to Korean media? But I don't think that's a fair question. So I'm gonna sort of put a twist on that question and ask you, when you visit Korea, what experience do you have where you feel like, oh, I'm home? And what other experiences do you have where you feel, oh, I don't belong here?
Yeah, you know what I really love when I go to Korea? I love looking at everybody's face.
Meaning?
I love all the different faces in Korea. I think people in America, they think that there's only one kind of Korean person. I really loathe generalizations about Koreans. And I think the first thing that I always feel is like, oh, I'm really home because everybody's so different and so vibrant. When do I not feel like I belong? Well, I feel really terrible that I don't speak Korean well.
Are you learning?
No, not actively, no. So when I was in college at Yale, Korean was not taught. So I created something called the Korea Studies Task Force with two of my friends. And we created petitions and we complained to the university and we raised a lot of money. And now because of that action, Korean is taught at Yale. What made me do those things? That's, I think, a more important question about being Korean. I did those things because I really believed that our culture was important. There are so many people that I have met who have told me that they hated being Asian when they're growing up in this country. I never felt that way. I actually thought it was fun to be Korean or interesting or it was worthy of study. And also, I knew there was a long history, which was very complex. One of the things that I really want to question is, why is whiteness considered ideal? And I think that depending upon your socioeconomic class, if you're Korean and you grew up in a black neighborhood, right, you might actually think that this is a better thing to do. And that's the reason why you might say, I really prefer hip hop music over yacht rock. Due to the racial segregation in this country, we often think that all white neighborhoods are somehow better. I see so many Asian Americans who grew up as minorities in all white neighborhoods because their parents tried so hard to be in allegedly safer, better schools. But they also grew up in a deeply white supremacist real estate situation, which causes mental harm.
Now, when I was going to NYU, there was this sort of strange situation. Do you know, I don't know how it is at Yale, but do you know that NYU has two different Korean student organizations?
Very common in most universities. I
had-
criticize this all the time.
We have KSA, Korean Student Association,
They had this at Harvard too.
and it's majority Korean Americans. And we also had KISO, Korean International Student Organization.
That's right.
And it was composed of people like me who come to the US to study and will probably go back to Korea. So why do you think there are two different associations?
I think that the two different Korean associations in one college campus is ludicrous. And wherever I go to speak at college campuses, I routinely mock them. I go, why do you do this? This is so stupid. And I actually tell the Korean Americans, don't do that. The Koreans from Korea who may come back or who are international students are probably significantly more interesting than anybody you're going to meet in this little group. You have limited yourself, not always, I want to say that's not always, in your belief that somehow that you are more westernized, more accepted, more American than those people who you consider not related to you. You have to create a separate group. Granted, it's possible that you want to just hang out with just people just like yourself. But I really hate this because very often adoptees are excluded.
Really?
Yeah, because they're thinking, I don't belong to either group. Because very often, and the measure is language. If you don't have language facility in Korean, then somehow you're less Korean. And that's the reason why I haven't actively tried to learn Korean. It's a decision. Because I think that whoever decides that I'm Korean or not is wrong. That's really up to me.
Right.
It's really up to me. You don't have the right to judge me in the same way I don't have the right to judge you. And also, if you're going to keep drawing lines saying this is good and that is bad, you're going to make a smaller and weaker team. If you really want to win, you want to have the best people. You don't want to have the team that you think is the best team because you don't know enough. Like, there are huge pockets in my brain that I don't know, that I need to fill, that you might actually have the expertise in. Whenever you see this fear and anxiety of being judged, always go back to the question of status. One of the things that I really loathe about our respective cultures, anywhere you go, especially if you become an elite person, is trying to do a status ranking. Is he more important than I am? And then how should I behave because he's more important than I am? I think one of the great things about the principles of America, I'm not saying practice of America, is the idea that you and I are equal. And if you and I are equal, then we don't always have to be worried, oh, did I say the wrong thing? Did I say it the wrong way? And that is one of the freeing things about, I think, English, is that you don't have this constant language ordering based upon hierarchy. I mean, I'm technically older than you are, much older than you are. But at the same time, you're a male. So depending upon certain worlds, men are considered more important than women, not necessarily Korea or here, but in other parts of the world. Should that matter? According to Americans, no.
Maybe because in New York, there are so many different people from all over the world living side by side. And because each ethnicity would have different standard of ordering, the only way that they can live together with all these different standards is just to eliminate it, right?
Maybe.
So let's say there are people from certain countries where age is important, certain country where wealth is important, and if you put them all together, you begin to see how ludicrous it is because when you see somebody else, ordering people based on their standard, you're like, why are they doing that? Oh, I'm doing it too. and then it just goes away, maybe. Actually, that just another question popped into my mind. So you said this high school where we're at, it's a public school where tuition's free.
Yes.
So the only metric that matters is whether you are studying hard and you pass the test.
If you pass the test.
Right.
I didn't study, I passed the test. I got
Okay.
lucky.
And you said that half the students here, they are living below poverty line.
That's right.
And then you went to Yale where the situation is completely different.
It was shocking.
what-
I've never met so many wealthy people in my life.
Yes. Even among Ivy League universities, Yale is considered sort of the university for the wealthy. First of all, is that stereotype true? And second, what was the experience like going from here to Yale?
I think there's more first-generation college students now at Yale than there was when I went, because I went from 1986 to 1990, which is a long time ago. But when I went there, it did have a racially diverse background and also a globally diverse background. But there was still this idea that whiteness was better. It was really quite pervasive on campus, and because of my background and because of my personality, because I'm from New York and from a public school, I didn't understand. And I think that's the reason why I did think it was important to create the Korea Studies Task Force. There's Chinese history classes and there's Japanese history classes. Why not Korean? Because you can't really study China or Japan without Korea. It almost doesn't make any sense in terms of 20th century history. I didn't have that much support when I was there in terms of my questions. Now it seems really logical that what I wanted to do makes sense. But at the time, this is very sad for me. But there were fellow Korean Americans who thought I was wrong, who thought that I was causing trouble, that I shouldn't complain, that I should just be grateful that I went to Yale. And this is where it's going to sound shocking, but Yale was lucky to have me.
That's a real New Yorker talking, right?
That's a real New Yorker talking.
Yale was lucky to have me.
Yale was lucky to have me.
That's awesome.
So I wasn't wrong, but at the time, I was so stunned by the white supremacist colonial mindset. Some of my fellow Korean Americans, there were many other Korean Americans who thought that I was right. And they signed the letters, their parents signed the letters, and that's why things changed. But it really hurt my feelings that we didn't all agree that our nation and our culture was worth studying.
But when I was reading Pachinko and I was reading about plight of Korean people who moved to Japan back in 1920s and 30s and were struggling to make it there. And often their descendants are still in an economically precarious situation. When they see wealthy Korean tourists who are shopping in Ginza or Dotonbori in Osaka, what do you think they feel? Do you think they feel proud that their mother country has become wealthy enough that their people can come and spend money there? Or do they feel like their ancestors made a mistake by coming here? Like, what do you think they feel when they see it?
I think they would feel similarly to how South Korean who might have come to, let's say, New Jersey in 1998 during the financial crisis. Let's say their bet to come to a new country didn't work out. And they see a wealthy Korean coming to the United States and going like, wow, that guy's a billionaire. They might be thinking, oh, maybe it would have worked out for me. But it takes a certain kind of grandiosity to think that just because you have similar DNA, that you could have been successful at any point. I really want to respect what South Korea has done in terms of its economy. But not everybody has participated in the rise of wealth. And right now, young people in South Korea are facing unemployment. They are facing inequalities. And that's also happening in Europe. Europe has a really high rate of unemployment for college graduates as well. So we're going to see more and more of this. Do the Korean Japanese feel badly? I don't think so. The thing that I heard from my interviews is they feel really heartbroken when they feel rejected when they go visit.
Korea.
Yes, they feel very hurt because in their minds they think, well, if I don't really belong here, maybe I belong in South Korea. And they go to South Korea. Not all, some South Koreans say, you're Japanese. You can't speak Korean, and they feel excluded.
Like some Koreans say to Korean Americans who come back, you're Kyopo, you're not fully Korean, it's probably the same people.
Exactly. And this is the reason why I think, for me, if you tried to tell me I'm not Korean, I would just laugh at you. Because I think it's funny. Because I would say, and exactly what did you do for Korean history or Korean culture?
I sometimes say this at my lecture that Korea has this weird concept, Google, right? National language. So if you're in the US, sort of standard language of education and administration, which is English, it's a language that's been spoken all over the world. So you can't say like English is American language only, right?
No, it's not. Actually,
India-
it comes from England.
Right, right. The name is English,
Right,
right?
exactly.
And then now you go to like countries like Indonesia where they have like 700 different tribes speaking all their own languages, and then people speak.
India, oh my gosh.
And people speak Bahasa Indonesia to communicate with each other, but you couldn't say that Bahasa Indonesia is the language of Indonesia. But Japan and Korea are in this very special situation where they have a language that's being spoken almost nowhere else. And if it's spoken somewhere else, it's mainly by descendants of people who emigrated. And everybody in that country more or less speak that language. And I think this situation where border of a nation matches the border of a language group creates a very specific psychology when culture, ethnicity, nationality is not the same. Like people begin not to understand. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview is a lot of Korean people think a real American is somebody with blonde hair, blue eyes, And one of the reasons that I came here to do these documentaries is to show that that's not what America is.
Yeah, I'm a real American.
Right.
And I'm a real Korean too.
So in this 21st century, you having grown up in New York City where a lot of different ethnicities live together and it actually works, what do you think is a more constructive way to think about Koreanness, going forward?
Oh, I really like this question, and you've really been thinking about it in such a smart way. And I want to just really elevate your audience because I think they're smart enough to grow.
That's why we're here.
Yes, that's why we're here.
We want to elevate people. That's why we're
Yes,
here.
it's because they're 궁금해.
궁금해.
I'm sorry, 궁금해. One of the things I want to talk about is cultural citizenship. Cultural citizenship is an anthropological idea, which is that, and it comes really from the Latino culture, that you could be fully American and also have your full cultural identity from somewhere else, including speaking Spanish, right? So you could have cultural citizenship and be a global citizen. So let's say, for you, you're probably a global citizen in many, many places. You could probably live in many, many countries. That's wonderful, but it does come from, one, your natural capacity, because not everybody could be a polyglot, and also it comes from the fact that you're able to have the privilege to travel to different places and study. And not everybody does, right? You and I probably want that for everybody.
Yes.
But if they don't, I would like for us to have a non-binary thinking. To stop thinking like this is the only way to be American, this is the only way to be Korean, this is the only way to be French. We have to stop thinking of things in such a narrow way because they don't serve any useful purpose. And as a matter of fact, because borders are changing, because the way we think about geography is changing, and also if you think about the economy around the world, we are all linked with each other's fate. If you think about the environment, they don't really respect rain and borders. We have to really think about what can we do to have the smartest, best team without always becoming so incensed about national pride.
The more I speak to you, more I feel like you are the quintessential New Yorker.
Okay.
As a quintessential New Yorker, if there is a Korean person coming to New York and they don't know anything about New York City, I heard that New York was the most diverse, most exciting city in the world. I want to go to New York City and broaden my mind. Could you design for them a short course?
I think I would go to the boroughs. I think I would go to Queens. I think I would go to the Bronx. I would go to Roosevelt Island. I would take the Staten Island ferry. These are inexpensive things I'm asking you to do. And also I would go to the library, I would go to the New York Public Library. Take the subway. I know we are afraid of crime. There's crime everywhere, and there are times that you can go when it's very safe. And if you travel with other people, it's very safe. I live in Harlem, New York. People are always surprised, but I live in a beautiful street. My neighbors are wonderful. I hope that you will elevate yourself and honor your curiosity and explore. I would go to Coney Island.
Get a hot dog?
Get a hot dog, ride the cyclone.
Excellent. Thank you very much for coming out to speak to us.
Thank you.
It's been really insightful. And I think what we've come here in New York City to do, I think about half of the job was just done. Right here in this classroom.
I'm glad.
The New York I wanted to show it. You're it.
Well,
This is it.
I am honored to be a guest here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Minjin Lee, and I'm a writer, and welcome to my high school, the Bronx High School of Science. I'm really so happy to be here and to meet with you, and I believe that being curious is one of the great privileges of the world, and I hope that you will always honor your curiosity, and I'm honored to be part of your community, which is Kumgumi. I had so much fun hanging out with Seungyeon, and I hope that you enjoyed our talk.
오늘은 파친코라는 유명한 소설을 쓴 한국계 소설가 이민진 작가님과 함께 이런 글로벌화된 세계에서 한국인으로서의 정체성을 앞으로 어떻게 가져가는 것이 좋은가에 대한 깊은 이야기 나눠봤습니다. 오늘 조승현의 탐구 생활은 여기서 마무리하고요.
금금이
안녕히 계세요.